Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for August the 18th through the 24th, 2024. So let's get right to it. Beginning with the Northeast region, we have the short-lived railroad union lockout that impacted the United States and Canada a few days ago. This lockout only lasted for a day before the Canadian government stepped in to halt the protest actions. Perhaps the rapid intervention by the Canadian government sort of indicates how serious this lockout could have been, mostly due to the trade between the United States and Canada. I think it probably had something to do with the water treatment. A lot of rail logistics specialists have mentioned that one of the more important bits of cargo that goes back and forth between the United States and Canada are water treatment chemicals for water treatment plants. A labor union lockout, shutting down of all trade between the United States and Canada, would have stopped these chemicals from flowing and could have presented real dangers to people who rely on water treatment facilities to get clean drinking water. I think this was probably more of a factor than anything else, considering that the lockout only lasted a day, or less than a day technically. But the hazmat and other cargo that would have been affected by the lockout, that was stopped a week ago. It takes a while for trains to get to their destination sometimes, so to make sure that there wouldn't be any hazmat or explosives or anything really dangerous just sitting on a random piece of track somewhere, a lot of shippers halted the progress or the shipment of these materials about a week before the incident. So even though this lockout only lasted for a day, we've got a week's backlog of cargo that didn't move for some kinds of cargo. Most other cargo is back to normal already, but some other types of random shipments between the United States and Canada will probably be impacted for a few more days. Again, labor disputes are not uncommon, especially when it comes to rail and things like that. In North America, rail has been kind of a hotly contested career field with regards to labor disputes over the past few years. So it's not entirely uncommon. However, it is just a reminder for the average citizen that these things can directly impact you, even though you think they might not. Speaking of the average citizen, moving down to an incident that occurred a few days ago down in the southeast, specifically just outside of Troy in North Carolina. This was a very interesting incident. I did not mention this in the wire because it doesn't really have that much operational use. However, I thought it was fascinating. Last Saturday evening, locals in the El Dorado area noticed a Russian helicopter landing in a field just off of Old Thayer Mill Road. Obviously freaking out a little bit, they contacted the sheriff, raised the alarm. Meanwhile, the dudes who were in the helicopter got out of the helicopter and took tactical equipment into the woods and just disappeared, leaving the helicopter behind. So the locals obviously were a little bit concerned about this, so everybody got spun up. Turns out it was just a training exercise. So this area is within the range of training operations being conducted from Fort Bragg, obviously. And it turns out that the person who owned the field, or the person who managed the field, or there was a store nearby, and people had been contacted and permission had been granted, but the word hadn't gotten out, essentially. And obviously this sort of spun up a big response in the community due to obviously an unmarked Russian type helicopter landing in their field. So again, false alarm, this sort of thing happens all the time in the area. Really anywhere within the flight path of Fort Bragg, anywhere within a few hundred miles of Fort Bragg, you see this stuff happening all the time. Anybody who's lived in kind of the area has just seen probably some of the most high-speed experimental aircraft that just get used in training operations. So again, this is not out of the norm. This was not particularly, I guess, not really that big of a deal. However, it just does highlight a few things, and I can get into this in more detail later, but really this highlights the importance of just being aware. I'm exceptionally proud of the locals' response and the fact that they didn't shoot these guys, because I'm familiar with the area and I'm very surprised these guys were not shot immediately upon landing. Just because, well, America, right? So It's really amazing that the locals realize that, hey, an Mi-17 helicopter is not a standard U.S. Army helicopter. It's not a standard platform, so it was probably some special dudes or the CIA or somebody. Also taking note that there were no markings, no tail numbers, no nothing, other than the model name of the aircraft just painted on the side. So, that's really good for locals to take note of, and it's really great that these guys got spun up. Turns out it was over nothing, but still, this is really good to be aware of. They all did the right thing. So again, this is really just a reminder of being vigilant. I'm sure the guys down there thought they had their own little version of Red Dawn happening, and I'm sure they got really excited, which is why I'm surprised nobody got shot, to be honest. As unlikely as it is for foreign Russian or Chinese troops to land on U.S. soil or something like that, and as extremely likely as it is for this to be a training exercise, this is still really good to be aware of. And again, I have just a few takeaways from this very brief incident. Number one is you may be the front line. You may be standing in your field one day and you see something that is not standard, right? We have to remember the Chinese spy balloon incident. People in Billings, Montana just looked up, right? They looked up and saw a foreign adversary over their soil. So these are not, concerns that are out of the realm of possibility, right? Another key takeaway is military platform recognition is paramount. You need to be able to understand what you're looking at. I know people are very well-meaning and things like that, but for somebody like me who's potentially having to manage thousands of individual reports of things, it makes it easier on me when I have someone who sends me a report that says, hey, I've got 6 Mi-17s heading north along Interstate 5, throughout my area. Here's the bearing they were seen at. Here's where I was located. This is a good report. I can't do anything with it when somebody sends me a message that says, hey, 2 helicopters just flew over my house at really low altitude. Okay, I can't do it. Well, what kind of helicopters were they? I don't know. Figure it out. Now is the time to learn. If you cannot separate, if you don't know the difference between a UH-60 Blackhawk and an Mi-17, figure it out, because this is very important stuff, and we can only handhold so much, right? Because things are getting pretty serious. So, again, community organization is very, very important. Organization, response, and community defense is very, very important. Now, what good are a bunch of dudes in the woods with some rifles up against what is probably a fire team sized element, or maybe even a squad? I don't know how many guys got out of the helicopter. Mi-17 can carry quite a few dudes. What good is the average, hillbilly in the woods up against these guys? Well, when it comes to observation, I think we know. I think we know that the hillbillies embarrassed these guys a little bit. But when it comes to actual firepower, harder to say, right? So, being able to understand the power of observation, being able to understand the power of community defense, start taking these things more seriously. And this training incident highlights that very, very strongly. And in that context, another thing to learn or take into consideration at least is whether or not you are adding things to the team, right? How are you helping your community out? Can you meet the expectations that are demanded of you when things get squirrely? Can you go at a moment's notice right now and perform your duty, whatever that mission may be? Again, we're not all infantrymen. We're not all going to be out there standing on the berm, right? But we all have roles to fill, and whatever those roles are, being able to meet those requirements in a situation where you don't get to choose the hour, you don't get to choose the day, you may have had no sleep, you may have to get up and go to work the next day, but you've still got to go out there and find militants in your woods. You know what I mean? This is kind of a big deal. Again, things are getting pretty serious. It's really hard to kind of measure and temper the amount of concern to have. I wouldn't encourage anybody to go just sit on the roof with a rifle because of this. You're not really going to change the way you live drastically over something like this. But again, it is just a reminder, right? These things happen all of the time, and they're happening more often, because I don't know if anybody's noticed or not, but big DoD has given a lot of money for training. So a lot of guard units, a lot of special dudes, CIA, agencies, they're doing a lot more training than they have in the past. Like, we're talking a serious amount of training. I think we all can kind of see where this is going, but still, you need to be aware of this. And if Big DoD feels the need to train more often, then maybe you should too. So it's really hard to balance all of this, to balance, say, your work life, your home life, and then potentially defending your homeland life. That's a little rough to do, but it's necessary. So might as well make things easier on ourselves now. Learn while we can. Learn while the lessons are still easy to learn, and so on and so forth. So we don't have to take everything like super life or death seriously, but approaching things with a little bit more deliberation is probably a good idea. Especially considering the number of people in general society, or even in the tactical community, right, that they're just not taking things seriously. So it doesn't mean that you need to be all strung out all the time, but again, it's we're progressing here. Things are getting pretty serious. So to what end, I don't know. But I can tell you that things like this are a good wake-up call sometimes. So I thought I would highlight that. But, of course, it doesn't always have to be a potentially foreign aircraft landing in your field. It could be a locomotive. Moving out west is a reminder of such. We had a head-on train collision in Boulder, Colorado, right in sort of the decently urbanized area. It looks like it was not as high speed of a collision as you might want to picture in your mind. Both conductors were injured. I don't know how seriously they were injured, but again, two trains hitting head on is, it happens. I mean, it does happen. It doesn't necessarily mean there's nefarious intent, but it's more rare than just, say, a routine derailing. So again, something to be mindful of, especially if you live near major rail logistics. Newsflash, I hate to break it to you, but our national rail infrastructure is not doing super hot right now. We've got bad track all over this country. We've got lots of different impacts being felt all over this country, and not all of them are deliberately nefarious. It's just things break, and there just hasn't been that level of priority, just like roads, just like airline maintenance, with regards to logistics and rail, there just hasn't really been a huge priority to fix things and keep things maintained. So this is the kind of thing that tends to happen. I don't know the cause of this. I don't know what happened. Again, there's got to be some sort of foul up, probably a whole bunch of links in that chain of causation to line up for two locomotives to hit head on, if that is indeed what happened. But anyway, local media doesn't really seem to care about it too much, so we don't really have that many details on it. But I did want to mention it because it's a helpful reminder of how, things can happen at the drop of a hat. Moving over to the United Kingdom, again, unrest continues. However, it has shifted quite significantly. So the stabbings and the murders and the very gruesome killings continue. However, the protests are not really... They're not really the people who started this sort of thing. So the indigenously English personnel aren't really protesting so much anymore. Not that I can see. You may have a few here and there, but they're just getting arrested for like shouting at police dogs, or getting arrested for waving their own country's flag in their own country. So really, the native Englishman is going underground. As you could obviously see. When it comes to protests, though, there are quite a few of those. A lot of pro-immigration, a lot of pro-Islam, a lot of pro-this, that, or the other. Anti-Israel protests are continuing. There's like a dozen different groups that are protesting and demonstrating at varying levels. Where we see the resistance being a little bit more substantial is, of course, where else would it be but Northern Ireland. So again, lots of kinetic actions going on in Northern Ireland to basically just burn down migrant centers, or places where immigration, I think they're calling them plantations now, immigration plantations, housing for thousands and thousands of migrants are taking place. So I don't want to put them all on the map because I need to double check my numbers, but by my count, we're talking almost 24 facilities have burned over the past few months in Northern Ireland alone. If you bring in the ROI into that, there's a few more, but most of the violence, as you might expect, is in Northern Ireland. So, how effective is it? I don't know, but they're doing it. So, it's really telling. And of course, interestingly, no arrests. No arrests have been made in conjunction with the arson attacks at these facilities. So, you know, people are going to do what people are going to do, and apparently the people in Northern Ireland have dedicated their time and effort to that. I know everybody's going to ask, so I'll just answer preemptively. Are there IRA sentiments forming? Well, by that, usually people mean, are there PIRA, provincial IRA sentiments forming? Probably. In Northern Ireland, probably. You got to remember the history of that is very complicated. So, I would say yes in Northern Ireland. Of course, I don't think the sort of anti-British sentiments ever really went away. The complicating factor is Protestants and Catholics being on the same side this time. So it's hard to say, because you've got the IRA on the one side and their more militant wing, the PIRA, from, going back a few years. And then you've got the Royal Ulster Constabulary on the other side, but it's more separated by like Catholics and Protestants. So right now, it seems like the allegiances and the sentiments, they're not really aligning in terms of this weird mesh of Catholic, Protestant, Irish nationalism versus British unity. It's not really aligning on those terms. It's straight up just anti-Starmer, anti-British government this time around. And that's a little bit of an easier sell. Which is why you're starting to see some of these groups come together, put aside their differences. That should tell you how badly Starmer has messed up when he can single-handedly bury the hatchet for good with regards to the troubles in Northern Ireland, just because he's not really treating the British people super well right now. So, what's going to come of this? I don't know, but I would not be surprised either way if more serious stuff started happening. Again, this is not Northern Ireland in the 80s, so will there be more organizational efforts? Maybe. There'd have to be. There'd have to be for any real change to occur. But right now, finding two British dudes who oppose Starmer but are willing to organize, in anything more than, a small club is hard to do. You got to remember that during the Troubles, there were very large political backings for, all sides in that conflict. Whereas here in the UK, and spoiler alert, in the United States as well, there's not a whole lot of very large political backing. It's all low-level sort of resistance efforts. You might get a village here or there. You might get a community that says immigrants out sort of thing, or you're not putting this migrant center here. But organizing, so we have the three levels of warfare, right? We've got strategic, operational, and tactical. Getting past the tactical and up into operational or even strategic is hard to do from the bottom up. You really need a lot of coordination. And so far, there really aren't any big politicians that I have seen in Parliament. There haven't really been any big celebrities come out and say what Starmer is doing is awful or just not good. The only two that I've seen recently are people bringing up Rowan Atkinson's old speeches on the freedom of speech, and Jeremy Clarkson, of course. I mean, that's Jeremy Clarkson, right? So he banned Starmer from his pub. So, that's a pretty big power base right there, maybe, when it comes to voices at least. So I don't know. I don't know how this is all going to shake out, but I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, 100% certainty, the British government has no idea how this is going to work out either. They think they know, but they don't know. They think they know how things are going to work out. They think that after a while it'll just calm down. I don't think so. They've gone way beyond the pale here. So, like I've mentioned, when the British government ends up criminalizing low-level speech crimes the same as a capital offense, well, you've just removed the threat of that capital offense being persecuted severely. So again, what I think doesn't matter. I'm just telling you what's going to happen, and I think it's not that big of an analytical leap to say, look, if the British government is going to go after people more seriously for a tweet, then the next person is going to look at that and say, well, I'm going to jail for 2 years for a tweet, or I could go to jail for 2 years for throwing this thing in my hand. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to do what they perceive to have the most effect. This is why throughout all Western and Eastern societies, we have varying levels of punishment for things. And when a politician or a political party or a regime starts to target things more selectively, well, you have removed the motivation for that potential criminal, right, to do the lesser offense. They're going to get the most, bang for their sentence, so to speak. So I don't understand why the British government seems to think that this won't happen, and that they're literally creating the means by which very serious things can occur in the United Kingdom. Granted, you could say the same thing about everything. I mean, the United States went into Iraq, and we knew exactly that we were creating an insurgency, and we did it for 20 years anyway. So, will the same thing happen in the UK? Probably not. Not to the same degree, of course, but I don't know. It'll be definitely something to keep an eye on. And the reason that I focus on this so much is because, well, the British government is probably the closest proxy for American culture in Europe. So, it's our traditional, historic homeland, so to speak, before, going back a few hundred years. We are a former colony of, the British Isles, right? The British Empire. So there's a strong connection there, culturally as well. Now, it's very, very different now, but still, when things happen in the United Kingdom, we had probably better look a little closely, because similar things can happen here. I don't want to say like, oh my gosh, what's going on in the UK is so super awful, and then ignore all the January 6 people who are still in prison. They're still being targeted, and their houses are still getting raided because they were there on the Capitol grounds on January 6th. So I don't want to make it seem like the UK is doing something so horrendously much worse than what we're doing in our own country right now. That's why it's important to kind of take notice to what's going on there. So it will be interesting to see how this develops. I personally am placing a higher priority on understanding the centers of gravity with resistance, the organizational efforts that communities are making to combat their, what is like the textbook definition of an authoritarian regime. So again, lots of lessons to learn, lots of takeaways that we can take from this. And it's not just the United Kingdom either. We can actually move over to Western Europe and see that Germany is going through the same thing. Now, of course, Germany, their culture is a lot different than the United Kingdom. However, I think Germany is probably more likely to crack down quicker than the UK is, simply because, well, mostly because of German culture, I think. Anyway, they had a mass stabbing at a diversity festival in Solingen, and they also had an execution-style attack in Frankfurt in the train station there. That's just over the past week. Violent crimes like this don't happen in Germany that often, and I think when let me put it to you this way: the United Kingdom basically had no stabbing attacks until they started importing a lot of the third world migrants, right? And because the gaslighting and the information warfare has been so effective in the United Kingdom, people just now have realized that this is the new normal, right? Stabbing attacks occurring every day. I'm not even listing all of them. There have been like 2 or 3 dozen attacks over the past week. So there are a lot. I'm just putting the biggest ones on the thing, because I think a lot of these are inter-migrant communities stabbing each other. In Germany, however, the gaslighting and the information warfare is, my opinion, but I think it's slightly less effective. So when you have a stabbing attack occur in London or Leeds or wherever, the British people say, oh, this is horrible, this is awful, we got to get a handle on this. But they think that it's the new normal. Whereas in Germany, they're shocked by it. Like it's pretty shocking. So a little bit more so. The Germans, I think, finally I'll get to this point. The Germans, I think, are less likely to say it's the new normal. I think they're more likely to do something about it. And this is probably to do with their neighbor Poland. Poland has zero tolerance for any of this stuff. They'll hunt down people on social media who are making a fool of themselves, being illegally in Poland, and they'll deport them. Like, Poland's stance on immigration is zero, like nothing, more or less, comparatively. So maybe Germany's got enough crossover there to where they are trying to. They're more likely to do something about these sorts of attacks. I don't know. I guess we'll have to see. It's all opinion, I guess, really. But in any case, these mass stabbing attacks are going to be a commonality for a while. So again, it's hard to say how this is all going to work out, but I'm sure that a lot of Europeans are kind of on edge, waiting to see how this all shakes out. So that's pretty much all I had for today. Let's go over the intercepted GhostNet reports from a few days ago, or Thursday night. Quite a lot. A lot of people are checking in. It's really good to see some of these things. I got a really good solid report for just a second, or actually this probably took about, I don't know, a minute to send or so, and then it immediately stopped. So I couldn't see who sent it or where it was coming from. It does reference Orange County Public Schools being closed due to some problem with the water. I think it may have been Texas, because there were a lot of dudes from Texas that were transmitting at this time, but not really easy to see. But a lot of people are starting to use this a lot more. I know I say it every time, but I'll make this a little bit easier to understand. I'm not going to say that radio is the end-all, be-all solution, especially considering it's very expensive, it's very hard to learn, there's not a lot of content out there on it, and there's so many other priorities that we all have to prepare for, right? However, this would have been, I think this is going to be very, very important moving into the future, especially if the crackdown on social media occurs. I don't think it's very likely for us to suddenly find ourselves without the internet completely and entirely. There will be no communications whatsoever. But preparing for that eventuality would not necessarily be a bad idea, right? So, again, there are many levels of how all of this works. There are many reasons to get involved with this sort of thing. And I'll make things a little bit more clear to understand here in the future. So, again, that's pretty much all I have here on the sources for today. Again, kind of an interesting week all around. Very strange things happening. I don't have anything solid to offer on what's going on in Russia and Ukraine with regards to that conflict. Nor do I really have anything on the Middle East, so I will skip those for today. I don't want to waste your time just me speculating on things. Ukraine will be important to keep an eye on. Russia, the whole Kursk offensive thing, is going to be important to keep an eye on. Same thing with the Middle East. I think in the Middle East, the powers that are involved in the peace talks are losing hope. I think they're losing hope in any sort of progress being made, but you never know. So, again, we'll have to save that for Monday for next week and see what comes of it. But yeah, busy week, busy time. It's only getting crazier as the election gets closer. I know it tends to seem like things get a little overwhelming. Things can tend to get a little, crazier than normal. It seems like every week is an apocalypse. Don't worry about it too much. This is an election year. These crazy things happen during every election year. We just tend to forget about it. But this election season being so important and on the heels of a highly questionable 2020 election, the 2024 election is a little bit more important than your average election cycle. But in any case, we got crazy stuff, so that's the kind of stuff we have to deal with. But in any case, we'll just do the best we can and see if we can't ride this one out. But yeah, that's all I have for today. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for all of your support, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.